What's up, Star Wars fans? On today's show, we're digging deeper into Season 3, Episode 5 of The Mandalorian. We've got a major cameo to talk about, and I'm going to talk about cameos in general and some deeper questions that we need to address. Welcome to the Story Geek Show, officially part of Orange Grove 55's network. Now let's dive deeper into Episode 5. Now, this has been a difficult one to schedule. We are all really busy. Dre and I spent 20 minutes talking about RCID and what's going on with Reedy Creek and all the lawyer stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But we had a really good episode of The Mandalorian this week, and I get to be joined by OG55 and Mr. VashSky to talk about it. So OG, tell the folks where they can find you. Besides this channel, you can subscribe to this channel, and you'll know everything that OG is up to. But what else are you up to, OG? Where can people find you on Twitter and all that good stuff?
Jay, I want to thank you so much for having us on today, talking Mando, talking some Star Wars. You can find me right here on YouTube, Orange Grove 55. You can also find me on Twitter at Orange Grove 55.
Perfect. Definitely follow OG. He's been very active this week. A lot of Disney news, a lot of political news. Everybody's really active. Everybody's pretty fired up about it. And I'm just sitting back eating my popcorn and trying to see how the thing's gonna play out. It's all very, very interesting. But one of the opinions that I rely upon quite frequently, because he is really good at understanding some of these issues and understanding some of the things that might happen, is Mr. Dre. Dre, how are you doing? How does this week go for you? I know you're preparing lots of thoughts. Where can people hear those thoughts?
Hey, if people want to hear those thoughts, at least preliminary thoughts, you can go to VashSky right there, at VashSky, right there on Twitter, which you can use to type that into the search bar and look me up for all the, as Christine Waysense McCarthy would say, for all the robust discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55, where we have some amazing shows like the one you're watching right now, The Story Geeks with Jay, Citrus Corner, Orange Nerd, and my own Freshly Squeezed, your source for juice, news, and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. I should change that in my byline right there, but yes, you can find me there.
I love it. I love it. We've also got Matthew Muir. We got BJ Vincent. We've got Theme Park Casual. We've got Kyle Kochi. I think I'm saying that right. All of those folks are in the chat. So thank you guys for being with us today. My name is Jay Sherer. I am the host of the Story Geek Show. I also have a YouTube channel called How Stories Work with Jay Sherer. I am a writer and a storyteller, and I like to break down stories. And today we get to do that for The Mandalorian. One thing I do want to say as we start out the show, we function with this show has been patterned a little bit after the John Campea show, in that we have some predetermined topics that we are going to talk about, but we also want to hear what kind of topics you would like us to address from The Mandalorian, particularly episode 5, but The Mandalorian in general. So leave those in the chat, and once we get through our discussion, we will go back to some of the things that you have brought up in the chat, and we will address those as well. So let's start out with the simple question that we always start out with every single show, and that is scale of 1 to 10, 10 being best. What was your personal feeling about this particular episode? OG, lead us off. What was this for you?
This one, it's funny. This one got a lot of praise in fan circles and what have you. And I thought it was a good episode, but I didn't think it was like the most amazing of the season, actually. I would probably put it like a 6.5 or a 7-ish.
Okay, 6.5 or 7-ish.
I mean, it was fun. It had cool action scenes, but I don't know. It didn't resonate with me like some of the other ones did. So, I mean, still a decent score, but just not way up there like some of the others.
That's more about like some of the ways that I've been rating this show so far, about the 6.5, 7. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, is there anything that you would say around like why you'd give it that score? Like you said, there was some good action. Was there anything else that you would say is kind of like, this is not my favorite?
Well, with this episode, it just felt kind of dragged out. I guess the best way to put it. The Pirates came in. It just felt like not a whole lot happened in 45 minutes. I mean, there was a lot of action scenes and what have you, but I don't feel like, I don't know. It just felt kind of spread a little thin. Interesting.
Dr. Dre, do you agree with OG, or are you on a different page here?
I can see what he's saying. I mean, I think I rated it myself 7.5. There's some really good depth here that I think might not have been initially picked up, right? And I think that depth really kind of carries the episode quite a bit, and it's unfortunate that it's not super balanced in that regard. There's a lot of action and stuff like that, but I would have probably rather seen a little bit of like what's Bo-Katan, story. What's all happening there? What's all happening with the New Republic? What's all happening with Moff Gideon and the cliffhanger ending that they had? I think that was really, really interesting. The main plot kind of felt a little pedestrian. I mean, we've seen plots like that before, obviously. Seven Samurai, High Noon, Tombstone, all that kind of stuff where, the bandits come in and, they rough up the town and everybody's got to flee and a hero comes in to actually save them. It's like, okay, we've kind of seen that before from not only just Star Wars media, but also from what is it, genre media specifically. So it's like, okay, that's a little bit of a pedestrian plot, but there's a reason why they're doing that, and I can't wait to get into why some of these things transpired the way they did in this episode.
Yeah, perfect. I'm gonna surprise you guys. I might shock you guys. I think this episode was a 9 out of 10. I love this episode. So let me just go through a couple of the reasons why. First of all, stunning visuals. I don't know what Favreau and Filoni are doing with the CG and with the volume, but it is better than some of the things that we're seeing in MCU feature films. So I love that aspect of it. You'll notice that this episode did something really, really artful in its storytelling, and that is that there was great conflict in every single scene, and there's always a reason for that conflict. And I thought that was really well done. Like even when you had Blue, I think his name's Tiva, but Blue, when he went to see Tim Meadows' character, and Tim Meadows' character is like, man, I can't send people all over the world to fight problems. Right. Even you'll notice the tension in that episode. One person wants something, the other person doesn't want to give it to them, and then there's a third person who's underhandedly working against both of them, right? So like that's great conflict. Love that. This to me was finally getting into, let's get out of the distractions of setup and let's showcase that we're on our way towards the ending that we see in sight here, right? This is the turning point there, which I think was really solid. And then I think we see a clear path forward for Bo. I think we see some amazing action sequences. The armor taking out the gun turret was amazing. The ground battle was amazing. The sky battle was amazing.
They dropped out just like you saw in Clone Wars, from Bo-Katan's ship, and I mean, you gotta love that scene. You gotta love how that was actually done. I will agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I really enjoyed this. To me, for an episode of The Mandalorian, is it the best episode of The Mandalorian I've ever seen? Absolutely not. This is a series that has given us consistent 10s, which is why I think I've been disappointed so far. But finally, I felt like, okay, we have a path. Everything's been set up. We're not going to introduce any new characters likely, or if we do, it'll be like an allusion to another season in the future that we may see. But other than that, I thought I liked it a lot. I gotta say it's a 9 out of 10. I thought it was really fun. I
think there are big reasons. I think there are definitive reasons as to why it could be like a 9, right? And like I said, we'll get into them, but there's some real depth and some lore here that, like I said, I don't think people fully appreciate. But please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's very, very, very great. So let's do this. Let's talk about something that's not very deep before we get into the deep stuff.
Sure.
Because this was going around Twitter like crazy. and that is that we had a cameo. And it's not only Star Wars that loves these cameos, MCU loves these cameos as well. The franchise model makes cameos. You can call them fan service. You could call them essential to the story. You could call them whatever you want to, but fans do really love them. So here's my question for you guys. Do you like cameos? I'll start with you, VashSky. Do you like cameos? Do you not like cameos? And then as a bonus, and I want the chat to say this too, what do you think has been the best cameo in the history of film and television? So do you like them? Do they fit in the stories? And which one do you think is the best cameo that you've ever seen?
Oh, that's interesting.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I'm putting you on the spot.
That is a really tough. Man, that's. Whew, I got to really think about that one. But look, I think in storytelling, I think cameos are appropriate. Every once in a while, right? It's when your story like overly relies on them that it can become an issue. I think, and I think everybody will agree to that. But the cameo that we're talking about here, are we talking about Zeb?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I thought that was really cool. This is something that was featured in Rebels, right? And now is making that transition from animation to live action. I do believe Zeb might, play a little bit more of an enhanced role here as we go along. We know that Hera, I believe, is supposed to be making an appearance, at least in Ahsoka, along with Sabine Wren, or maybe she is. But we know Sabine is going to be making an appearance. So it's like, these disparate entities that were very, very close at one point. It would make sense that they would come together in some way down the line here. So we'll actually see what that is. I think Zeb himself was handled pretty well. And he's in a place that you would like imagine him would be. I believe he's part of Blue Squadron, which, if we remember, that was the Battle of Scarif where Blue Squadron was actually featured. And if you look at that scene, well, Hera's ship is part of that. So it's like this kind of this drawn out continuity that you would maybe expect Zeb to actually be there. It's like, okay, good. Now the cameos that don't quite work, I think Dave Filoni is in the bar sitting across the way there, and he's got like his signature. Yeah, he's got his signature hat on. Like you would, yeah. Let me see if I can find it actually in the episode here.
That's funny. I didn't see that.
Yeah, so like that kind of stuff, not so good. OG, I don't know if you have control over this, but let me see here. Let's see, right there. You see that?
Oh, there he is.
Literally Dave Filoni with his signature hat, and it's like. Okay, I think that might be going a little bit too far there, Dave. I mean, that's ridiculous. But you know what, though?
But you know what, though, not to interrupt, but it kind of reminds me actually of the George Lucas cameo in Star Wars. George put himself in that.
That's true.
Did he put himself? Is George Lucas in there?
He is.
At the very end, it is believed that is George Lucas right there. There is some discussion about that, by the way, OG. But well, for the sake of this conversation, I will concede to you, yes, George Lucas at the end there. But that's like a really subtle one, with the whole hat and everything in here. Look, I think if it takes you out of the scene, not a good cameo. But if it leaves you firmly in place and it's like, oh, that's cool, that person's like in this, and you feel that kind of you feel that kind of excitement, but it doesn't necessarily take you out. I think those are the best well done cameos. But OG. Maybe you have different thoughts on this than I do.
For me, it's kind of all about execution. I think in general, though, I think with a franchise like Star Wars or the MCU, I think you need to kind of have these cameos, these connective tissues to kind of tie everything together, right? One of the big issues that I had with a lot of the animation in Star Wars for the longest time is that it always felt too separate from the main stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that I'm glad that we're seeing some of the animation stuff come into live action and kind of tie it all together.
Right.
I think that's very important for something like Star Wars. But again, it all comes down to execution. It could come off like a total shameless. What do they call that? Glove shitto, I believe is the term for that.
Yeah. Exactly.
It could come off like that if done the wrong way. I think the Zeb thing in this particular episode was handled really nicely. He sounded great. Was that the same voice, by the way?
Same voice.
Yeah, it sounded
Okay.
like it. Yeah.
He sounded great. He looked great. I don't know.
looks
I
good.
kind of like these little touches. It kind of brings everything together, and it makes the animation less of its own like side thing and more of like the main. It feels more like main canon to me now because it's connected with the live action stuff. So I actually really like it. But again, it just like you have to do it right. You can't just throw things in there and make it look like a cheap cameo. It has to be done
Right.
with respect, and I think in this case it was.
Did you notice that Zeb used the "good luck"? You're gonna need it. From Han Solo's famous line in Return of the Jedi. That was
Fantastic.
pretty fun as well.
It's a cameo with a cameo almost, right?
Yeah. Reference to a reference, right?
Yeah.
Inception.
As meta as you can get there. I think I agree with you guys. For the most part, I agree that cameos are fun. I actually think that they're better when it is like how they handled Zeb, which is to say that it's you see him in a place where you think that he would be, and that he does not necessarily have any particular impact on this particular storyline.
Yeah.
I do think that sometimes what I don't like about when they use cameos is when they bring somebody in and it is done as like okay, so I'll give you two examples. As much as I love the Luke Skywalker at the end of season 2 of Mando, that was season 2, right? It wasn't season 1.
The season 2 finale.
As much as I love that, the only problem is it's kind of like, look, like Luke can show up at any time, anywhere, and like just completely obliterate anybody at this stage of Star Wars. So it just feels a little unfair. It takes away from like the focus of where the story has been. Did I love it? Yes, but from a storytelling perspective, I go, it's kind of a cheap trick from a storytelling perspective, right? So I think, but see, like that was somebody who was integral to the ending of the conclusion of that story, but that was not foreshadowed or not a part of it in any other way except for in that last moment. And so that can kind of cheapen the story for me sometimes. I think the other example I would use is I'm sure that there's more of them in the MCU actually, but it's like this because the other way you can kind of misuse it is that you can foreshadow something that never actually happens. Like, so in this one, like Zeb doesn't do anything and we don't expect him to do anything. It's just like, here he is, right? But there are sometimes, I think the MCU is more guilty of this than the others, but like they're like, here's a character and you're like, oh no way, did not know this character was in this movie, did not know this character was going to be a part of this story. And it's like, oh no, they're really not. Like it's just like a cameo that seems like it's going to impact the story, but then it doesn't. That usually bums me out quite a bit. So this one I thought was fine.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than what you're describing, but like you said, there are some cheap tricks that are employed even by Star Wars itself, right? I think like as good as Rogue One was, there's that scene where Cassian Andor and what's her name? The gal
Jyn
Erso, yes. Yeah. Sorry about that. Where they're walking through the streets of the the first planet that they're actually on, and you see like I have the death sentence on 12 systems or whatever. Like those guys are like in like the streets, and it's like, come on. I mean, I don't think they're there at that moment. This is not an appropriate place for them. What are we doing? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. But some of my favorite cameos of all time have been used for humor. So I really liked Matt Damon in Thor Ragnarok. That was really funny to see him.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
And again, that's more of a cameo of not a character we've seen in world before, but rather a movie star that we don't expect to see in that role doing that thing. So it's a little bit different. Same thing with Brad Pitt in Deadpool 2, which is hilarious that he's in Deadpool 2. And it's just like the briefest of briefest cameos. Like it is so short. But my favorite of all time, and it's because it's used for humor and it actually has a meaningful point in the story, is actually Bill Murray in Zombieland, which I thought was phenomenal. So those are any cameos that come to mind for you guys where you're like, that was a great cameo?
Go ahead, Jay.
For any movie, Jay, or
for any movie of any series in history?
Oh man, this is a tough one, dude.
It's super tough.
This is a really, really tough one. You this is gonna be kind of funny. A few years ago, I'm a big Family Guy fan.
Oh yeah.
And a few years ago, they did a cross. I don't know if this counts as a cameo. It's more. I guess it's more of a crossover. But they had The Simpsons on there. And I thought that was really
but that's kind of a
fun.
cameo. Yeah, that's a good one.
I really like. I really like that. I like that little Fox. Speaking of connective tissue, right? That little Fox animation kind of universe, kind of coming together. I thought that was pretty dope.
That is pretty dope. Actually, I just saw a clip to your point. I just saw like a reel where the somebody from where the dad from Family Guy jumps in. And I'm gonna get to the BJ Vincent quote here in just real quick. But
Sure.
the dad from with Peter, right? Peter Griffin. He walks in to the Bob's Burger bar, and then they turn around, and then there's Homer sitting there waiting for his drink or whatever. That was kind of cool too. BJ Vincent says, "I'm not sure if this would be classified as a cameo, but I liked Black Chrysanthemum in the Book of Boba Fett. That was awesome. I did love that. That was a great cameo.
Great stuff.
And Qui-Gon Jinn and then, by the way, used effectively because he's actually a part of that series. He's not just like used in a scene. Like he shows up throughout the whole series. And then Qui-Gon Jinn in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which is definitely a cameo. And was definitely fun to see him back in that role. I did feel like in that particular cameo, I don't know if you felt this way, BJ, but I did feel a little bit like, oh, bummer. I wish he was not in this like more meaningfully as a part of this whole series. But maybe he will be in season 2 if we get a season 2. Any that you can think of, Dre, where you're like, man, that was a cool cameo?
Yes. Yeah. I think, well, two things, actually. There's cameos and there's references. If we're talking about references, I got one for you, which actually brings us back to the actual episode itself. But I think one of my favorite cameos of all time is definitely got to be Christopher Walken in Pulp Fiction. I mean, that is some amazing stuff right there. Sets the whole table for that whole famous story Bruce Willis's character in that picture, and I absolutely love that. There's some others though, what is it, Dan Aykroyd and Casper, for example, right? That's a pretty fun one, where he's all kind of dressed up as a Ghostbuster. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's pretty good right there. What is it, Tom Cruise, Tropic Thunder? That's a kind of a
That's a great one.
It's one you're not quite expecting right there. So it's there's some fun ones in there. But I will agree with you, Bill Murray, Zombieland. That's pretty good right there. But as far as references go, it's interesting. If you notice Grief Karga's little last speech right there, where he awards the victors their plot of land, right? And he says, "Oh, everything from the lava flats to." And then he says a certain name of a certain place on Navarro, and he used the term Belloc. Belloc being the guy who originally played Boba Fett back in Empire Strikes Back, and I believe Return of the Jedi as well. So that was like a really kind of cool, like, oh, nice,
That's cool. That's cool.
So there are some kind of cool references and stuff, and what I think I appreciate about the Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni kind of verse is they kind of know like when to use these things, when not to, so it's not too distracting. And I think overall they're executed pretty well. I understand people are like, oh, member berries and all that kind of stuff. No. It's all, I think, done very, very appropriately. And like you said, OG, it kind of unifies the world, so to speak, with these cameos, right? Whether it be animation, the prequels, sequels, etc.
Yeah, it's necessary for a franchise like this that's building out this huge universe. You got to have that connective tissue. It's not just like a standalone movie that you're throwing in random cameos. These films and these shows have to connect to each other. And the only way to really do that is through a lot of these different characters and planets and what have you. So, yeah, I got no issue with it. In fact, I think it's pretty necessary.
Yeah. And fun fact, Belloc is also the villain in Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that's another name usage there. And another you mentioned Tarantino with Pulp Fiction. And what I felt like was really interesting was seeing Tarantino, and I believe he's in Desperado, and he tells the joke. Yeah, he tells the joke, which is really, really cool. And obviously That's a Robert Rodriguez directed property. Also, Robert Rodriguez is related back to The Mandalorian as a director of Boba Fett in one of the episodes of The Mandalorian. Yeah. So you got that connective tissue there. It'd be crazy to see a Tarantino Star Wars film. That would be crazy.
Oh, that'd be crazy.
That would be crazy.
There's been talk of him doing a Star Trek film. Maybe he might go over to the dark side.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. Now, BJ Vincent did say that he did feel the same way about me as in relation to the Obi-Wan cameo, or sorry, the Qui-Gon Jinn cameo in the Obi-Wan series. And then he also says, "Did you see the Dolly Parton cameo in the series The Orville?" And I can't say that I did because I don't watch The Orville.
I did not see Dolly Parton in there. Well, look, national treasure. So
yeah,
national
treasure. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. All right, let's get into a little bit deeper topics here. The first one I want to get into is I can't remember this character's name, but her character name, she has a specific name, but now they're calling her Officer G68. So this is the Moff Gideon employee, right? Who has the shorter haircut. I can't remember what her name is.
I'll look it up for you.
Okay, cool. But she claims that she was liberated, right? So there's a scene where Tiva is talking to Tim Meadows' character, which Tim Meadows is his own cameo because Tim Meadows is hilarious. And for those of you who don't know, he used to be on SNL back in the day. So I don't know why they keep using comedians in The Mandalorian, but they do, and it's cool. But she's kind of saying she was liberated from the Empire, but based on her behavior, it seems like she's still solidly Imperial leaning. And so we criticized the Empire earlier in this series because we said, well, the Empire treated people. By the way, we got Lorena is in the chat briefly, so just want to say hello to Lorena.
What's up?
Hello there.
By the way,
Floridian.
Yeah, I know. I wish I was there. That's why I told her. I said she could, because I invited her to be a part of this call, but she's like, "Oh no, I'm going to be at Magic Kingdom." And I'm like, I feel pretty jealous that you're at Magic Kingdom. That's a pretty good place to be. So thanks for hanging out with us, Lorena. And I will be on, I know that all of you guys have been on Lorena's show. I will be on Lorena's show as well. She interviewed me, and that will be coming out this next week. So you guys can check that out. Definitely support Lorena and her channel. So with this idea, right? We had this idea that the New Republic was going to liberate people from the Empire and start to be inclusive of them in the new structure of what was going on with civilization. Mm-hmm. Now, my question for you guys is this. It seems like the Empire, through people like Officer G68, are starting... Kane. Oh, yes, thank you so much, gotcha. Kane. Elia Kane. They're starting to infiltrate the New Republic. So was this a bad idea? Did the New Republic actually screw this up? We criticize them for being too much like the Empire and being restrictive of these people, and yet these people are infiltrating their government with the Empire's purposes in mind. Who wants to go first on this one?
I'll go first real quick, because this actually ties back to our buddy Bob Chapek. And some of the issues he had when he took over from Bob Iger is that a lot of the issues Chapes had was the former administration, the Iger administration, and remnants of that were still involved in the Chapek administration and sort of underhanding it and undercutting it along the way.
Yep.
That's a risk you take when you sort of absorb some of the past into the new.
Correct.
So I think, yes, it's absolutely a bad idea. This is to say it won't always happen with everybody that came from the Empire, right? But it's just a numbers game. I mean, it's inevitable that there will be at least a handful that will be shady like this and try to undercut the New Republic. So yeah, I think it was a really, really dumb idea. I'm kind of shocked that they would even go this way and not realize that this was a possibility. So yeah, I think this was not a good idea. And by the way, what was her name? Elia Kane, you said, Trey?
Elia Kane, yeah.
Elia Kane. I absolutely love her character, by the way.
I know. She's so good.
She's quickly becoming one of my favorite characters in Mando. The actress, and I'm so sorry, I don't know her name, but the actress who plays her is doing a phenomenal job. So I hope she sticks around, because I think she's
Katie M. O'Brien.
Okay.
There you go, OG.
Keep going, Katie.
You go.
You're rocking. You're a rock star.
Very good.
Yeah, she's doing a phenomenal job. So, okay, what do you think, Dre? Is OG right? Did they blow it?
I think they blew it a little bit. Look, I mean, this goes back to my conversation about Operation Paperclip, right? Which, if you guys don't know, they definitely look that up. I think America's Untold Stories with Eric Hundley and Mark Robert have a really good series of YouTube videos that you should definitely watch if you want to know more about this. But President Truman said that Operation Paperclip was a disaster, one of the worst decisions that he ever made, integrating these World War II German scientists, let's say, into the fabric of the intelligence agencies and military industrial complex and so forth, right? He was not, let's say, he had regret over that, which, by the way, well, that has a Disney connection as well. Anybody ever heard of Werner von Braun and some of the stuff that he was actually doing for Disney back in the 1950s or so with the Tomorrowland series of different film projects they were producing at that time? Very, very interesting. But Werner von Braun, who I understand President Carter said that he was a beloved figure, well, he did some horrible things back in the day while he was working for I don't even know if I can say the name, but
yeah, the enemies of Indiana Jones. The enemies of Indiana Jones.
When he was working for them, not good, not a good figure, not a good person, and unfortunately, people have actually cited that as a reason, let's say the U.S. was so kind of obsessed with going to war with the Soviet Union and so forth, and the way that they did, and just all kind of things sprout up because of that, right? And that was with a very kind of centralized government at that time. This, on the other hand, is a very decentralized government, right? There's not a lot of control out there. Even Gorian Shard says, the New Republic can't even protect the mid-rim from the pirate nation, he says. And it's like, whoa, the mid-rim, those are supposed to absolutely be under the protection of the New Republic. But, like you said, Jay, going into this conversation, they left it as a choice for these worlds to either join the New Republic or not, right? And it's interesting because there were centralists, as depicted in the book Bloodline. There were a centralist faction that wanted that chaos for the mid-world, for the mid-rim, I should say, and the outer rim to actually exist. Why did they want that to actually happen? Well, they were funding the First Order's efforts to take over. Why were they doing that? They were actually using the underworld to do this, which was very kind of interesting to kind of launder money, utilizing those methods over to the First Order. The reason why is because they wanted chaos, so that when the First Order actually took over, they embraced them with open arms for actually getting rid of things like pirates and so forth that were conquering those other worlds. So we see that a little bit in Navarro, and we see that a little bit with this conversation, right? That there needs to be order on this frontier, right? In this western town, and unfortunately, the decentralized New Republic can't get it done. And so for the centralists, that's exactly what they actually want happening. They want the world to embrace order as was established with the Empire, maybe in a different form, and maybe they don't understand the true implications of what that actually means, but that is what they want. So I thought that was really kind of interesting storytelling, and doing it through a pirate invasion, which, from what we understand, leading up to the sequel trilogy, actually happened on a lot of the key worlds in the Outer Rim and the Mid Rim. I thought that was really kind of interesting and really well done by Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, working within this framework and showing that on screen.
Yeah, and it's not unlike what we saw even with the formation of our country here in the U.S.
Yes,
I mean, when we started to we if you go to American history classes, a lot of them sound like, hey, we were in the right, and I'm not saying we were in the wrong, but we did do a lot of things that were. Piracy was a thing that we used to do. We used to do when you're trying to create a revolution, sometimes you include in your revolution people who are willing to do things that may be doing them for different reasons than you're even doing with them, but they accomplish the same goal, and then you get tied together. So I think you guys are bringing up some really good points.
And that's why revolutions largely fail, right? Is because you have so many disparate, motivations, let's say, driving key decisions on how that new government is actually going to be formed and so forth. And that's why the American experiment is kind of noteworthy in that regard, because many of these things failed over time, as we have seen dictatorships rise and fall and so forth, right? The Articles of Confederation, we talked about this in the episode 3 kind of recap there, and how like it was too decentralized, it couldn't actually function and needed more centralization. In this way, you're kind of seeing the Articles of Confederation kind of play out here, and the vulnerabilities that leads to. And so it does lead to corruption, as is highlighted by Elia Kane's character, who I believe is definitely still working for Moff Gideon for this kind of this imperialistic purpose, let's say. So it's interesting. It's a really kind of interesting thing playing out here.
It is. And BJ points out that the Pershing Kane episode did not detract from the Mando story, because it's obviously building towards something bigger, with Crack showing in the New Republic, which is absolutely the case. Absolutely. And I wanted to take a little bit of another real world example that's maybe even more relevant for us, like in the modern day. Shout out to Jalen, by the way. Thanks for joining us, Jalen. We're happy to have you with us. And they've done a good job this season with the not so obvious filler episodes. Each episode seems like it progresses the story in some form. Absolutely. So we're seeing more of that occur here, and more of those connective tissues being made. One of the things I wanted to talk about, because stories do something that I think is really powerful for the world. They can be propaganda, but they can also break through propaganda. And I think this is one of the ways that stories do that. Stories say, we can have this ideological imperative that says, let's be inclusive of everybody that was in the former regime that was technically doing bad things, but we'll try and reform them. But also, just some of those people will slip through the cracks and be nefarious and do nefarious things. And that's, so we've got to be, because generally speaking, when things get political, I'm going to use those words in quotes. When things get political, you tend to find one ideology versus another ideology. But when you get into the actual, and those to me often end up being propaganda pieces. Whereas if you get into the actual stories being told and how they unfold, you start to understand a little bit more that these things are nuanced. They're not A or B, but there's some version of C that we need to work out here. What mistake is the New Republic making here? Well, the Empire might have just put everybody in front of a firing squad and just said, you're done. Or they might have said, you got to be assigned to the salt mines, or whatever they would have said, or the spice mines. But here, what the mistake the New Republic is making is to welcome everybody with open arms and not put some additional considerations and factor that might prevent those people from acting nefariously.
Correct.
I was watching, just to showcase a real world example of this, and it's good for people, I think, to educate themselves on this too. Dre, you might be more familiar with this than I was. But I was watching some Peter Santinello YouTube videos, and what Peter does is he goes into an area that most people don't get to see much of. So he does things like he goes and hangs out in LA with the Bloods and the Crips. He goes and hangs out in New York with some people that we wouldn't normally get to see the inner workings of how that all pans out. But he did a whole series of videos on the border crisis right now and how immigration is playing a role. And again, I'm not going to get political, because what I'm saying is not you should think the way that the Democrats think, or you should think the way the Republicans think. But what I did want to point out was, when you go down and look at the stories that are actually occurring and how those things are actually playing out in the real world, it's far more nuanced than whatever political message either party's putting out. And so what it showcases to me is that it showcases that these issues are very nuanced, and we don't understand them fully until we start to experience the stories of the people involved in them, not just the talking points of people who are not dealing with them directly at all. And this episode did that for me. It was like, oh yeah, like we do want people not to experience recidivism and go back into their former ways. But we also need to be careful that they don't try and ruin the things that we're setting up, that are trying to be better for our society. And I think that there's a lot of examples of that. But to me, that was like, oh, cool. Did Filoni and Favreau have something to say about some of the discussions that we're having in real life, and they're not as easy as we think they are.
Mhm.
So I thought that was cool. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like you said, breaking through propaganda or being propaganda. It's like the Soviet films in the 1950s versus Hollywood, right? I mean, there was definitely some of them. You had a little bit of overlap of entertainment and propaganda value for sure, but mostly, I mean, the Soviet films were laughed out because they weren't entertaining. They didn't speak to that human condition. They didn't speak to that human philosophy that the Hollywood films at the time so well did, relatively speaking. So it's a really kind of interesting thing you touch on there, Jay, and it's interesting talking about the New Republic, right? So it's like getting back to it a little bit. Why are ships not docked on big star cruisers or capital ships, right? Like, why are they at like little bases and stuff? And their military is like absent, and it's like, yeah, it is. Aftermath actually detailed that Mon Mothma put in a directive to get rid of the both the
Separatists.
the Rebellion Army and the Rebel Alliance Army and the Imperial Army, right? So that there'd be none of those forces out there out in the wild, which works good in theory until you have an external threat like pirates or like the First Order. that becomes a really bad thing there, and it's kind of like how our the forefathers of America, let's say, that's how they felt. It was like, oh, we're not going to have a standing army because it can only be used for corrupt purposes, right? And there's a famous speech, "We don't go seeking monsters to destroy." That was talking about foreign policy and utilizing an army. It can only be used for corrupt purposes. And it's like, yeah, that's true up until the War of 1812 and some things that happen. It's like, you kind of need something there. So it's really interesting how these stories are kind of playing out. And to have the Mandalorians actually be the heroes of this story, that's kind of a nice change of pace as well. They're kind of fighting for a cause and so forth, and how that actually connects with Bo-Katan's story. Very interesting.
Very interesting. And there's some really interesting comments in the chat, and I do want to get to those because those are bigger topics. And we have only one more question that I want to run by you guys before we get to those topics.
Sure.
So I'll start with you, OG. Sure. The armor tells Bo to remove her helmet, which is shocking given the covert's beliefs. But then she tells Bo that she needs to lead all of the factions of Mandalorians and that Mandalore must come together. So I kind of wanted to know, like, what did you think specifically about that scene? Oh, I do have one other one that relates to some of the stuff in the chat, so we'll get to that too. But what did you think of that scene, and how do you think that scene is going to play itself out, OG?
It's funny. We talked a lot doing the Story Geeks Mando, episode reviews. We talked a lot about the rigidness of the philosophy with her, right? With the armor. Correct. Very rigid. It's the rules over the people, basically, right? Kind of this mindset. And I think that this scene I thought was really, really important because you're starting to see cracks in her philosophy, I think. She's not so rigid anymore. The fact that she told Bo-Katan to take off that helmet, that's a massive deal. That's a massive deal coming from her. So I think things are changing, and that was a huge indication of things to come. So pretty exciting, pretty awesome stuff. And I think it's necessary in order to unite these different factions. I think you're going to have to, you can't be so rigid. You're going to have to bend a little bit to kind of get to that united front. I think I think that's necessary. So smart move, but a huge change of philosophy for her. So
big deal. Yeah, really big deal. What do you think, Dre?
Oh, it's a huge deal. It's a massive deal, right? So we talked about how the fundamentalist types, right, and what kind of conflict would that have with the more atheistic or I want to say non how to put that? Well, anyway, you get it, right? Non-theist a
Yes.
portion of the Mandalorian clans, let's say. How is that actually going to fly? Well, now we're seeing it, right? Bo-Katan is kind of shaking things up a little bit. She's definitely kind of earned her place in among them. And even though she doesn't quite follow everything that they do, for example, the Mandalorians salute at the end upon receiving their tract of land. She does not, right? So that's it's kind of showing that she is one of them, but she's not like of them. It's there's kind of this separation here, which I thought was really, really kind of interesting. But the I think it's interesting. This whole series has been very much kind of an allusion towards religion and how that has all kind of worked right here. If we share my screen right there, OG, real fast, this light shining on Bo-Katan is very almost messianic, almost like a prophet. You would see depicted in either Judeo Christian theology and so forth. So it's a very kind of interesting thing what's happening here. And look, I believe the armor actually uses the word tribes and not clans and not some other terminology that we have heard the armor use before, or Mandalorians depicted as before. And I think that's a very kind of interesting thing right there. It kind of harkens back to the 12 tribes of Israel and how they were kind of disparate in a way, but there was a time when they could where they kind of came together over the promise of a land for the Israelites, right? And so this whole kind of thing has kind of harkened back to the kind of the Mandalorians are coming together to take back their homeland after being driven out, similar to what the Israelites returning to their homeland after the Exodus from Egypt. It's interesting because in the first episode, I didn't even know this, but I guess like the shard from Mandalore that the Mandalorian or Din Djarin actually brings to the armor, right? That is a quote straight out of Exodus, but in the Mandalorian language. I did not know that. I was like, whoa. I mean, so we're laying it on pretty thick here. But it's all kind of analogy towards the stories actually featured in the early part of the Bible. So it's a really kind of an interesting kind of thing that's going on here, which is very, very interesting, right? I think the armorer sees. She even says you kind of walk between worlds kind of thing, or you walk between ways. I forget the actual phraseology that she uses specifically, right? And she can be this person that unites us together. In order to do so, though, I think she has to take off her helmet, right? Because I think the armorer knows that they aren't necessarily as respected among some of the tribes or clans if she is so fundamentalist in their approach. So even the armor is kind of softening up there. Bo-Katan is taking on some of the fundamentalist teachings and philosophies of this specific clan. I think that's really kind of interesting. But she is this messianic figure, and I think the armor knows that, which is why she is tasking her to do this. Which, by the way, by right and creed and by her bloodline, Bo-Katan is the natural leader for the Mandalorians. It's just that she's got to win back that Darksaber in combat and ride that Mythosaur. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all transpires, along with a potential Mandalorian civil war, as was alluded to maybe at the very end of this episode as a cliffhanger, and then the retaking of Mandalore itself. All things that people should really be excited about.
That's really good, and you're hinting at my next question too in there. OG, can you pull up the Matthew Muir comment, because I think this is really interesting.
The one about Bob Iger.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's this concept that we're seeing play out, in that one of the things that Chapek said that he wanted to do for Disney was that he wanted to begin to moderate the political affiliation, so that there wasn't an obvious political leaning of the Walt Disney Company. Not that it's individual people couldn't hold their own beliefs, but that they might speak out less in terms of being a Disney representative for those particular beliefs, that the content itself that Disney was producing would be more applicable to both parties as opposed to one party over the other. I really I think that what Matthew's comment is kind of hinting at is something that's actually being, again, talked to us, encouraged to us, a level of thinking from Filoni and Favreau that has a purpose not only for the story, but also has an encouragement to the Star Wars fan base and the Disney fan base at large to say, we should probably all be a little bit more like the Armorer, in that we can all unite around something that we love and unite around something that brings us together, while also acknowledging that we feel very differently about some things. And we may be on a podcast saying, I really feel this way. But in reality, we can be on the same podcast together and be like, I appreciate that you feel that way. Now, let me say that what I feel like, and I see it a little bit differently. And I hope you've heard that on our show, too, because we've had wildly different opinions from people on our show about what happened to certain characters and how certain things are playing themselves out. And I think that that's kind of part of what we're supposed to see in this, is that as Star Wars fans, as people who live in the United States, as human beings in general, we can all have slightly different opinions and still have the ability to come together and have a united front towards what we believe to be a better goal. And so I think that that's all applicable here.
No, that's very well said, Jay. Well said. And that's one of like my main mission statements when it comes to OG55 is a group of people that love this stuff, that whether you agree or disagree or have different stances, we're all friends, and we're all just here talking about the same thing. And at the end of the day, we all love the same thing, but we might see, different perspectives. I don't agree with Dre on everything. We agree on a lot, but there are certain things we don't agree with. We're going to be doing a video soon on the whole Reedy Creek thing. We're probably going to be disagreeing a lot about that, but he's still my brother. I still love the guy, whether we agree or not. At the end of the day, too, we still have, at its core, a love for Disney and Walt's legacy, and Star Wars and George Lucas's legacy. Same with you, Jay. I mean, we don't agree on everything, but that doesn't matter. You're still my brother. I still love you to death. And it's fun just to come here and talk shop and, balance these opinions and perspectives off of each other. And in fact, not only do I like it, I prefer that. I would be so bored to get on any podcast where it's like 4 or 5 people just saying the same thing, right?
Yeah,
it's good to have a little bit of like, back and forth and disagreements and stuff like that. I think it just makes life more exciting. I don't know. That's just how I see it. So absolutely.
I think this is actually said explicitly in episode 2 of The Mandalorian, when Bo-Katan and Din Djarin are walking through the rubble of Mandalore, and Bo-Katan says, I believe Din Djarin says, hey, this must really affect you seeing it like this. And Bo-Katan says, what really affects me is how we came to blows, or how we warred against each other, even though we were all of Mandalorians, right? Something like that, kind of paraphrasing loosely, of course, but that's what she was kind of saying. I do think you're right, Jay. This show, and I think other pieces of content that are being produced by the Walt Disney Company, and like I said, it's spread out areas, but I think they're kind of showing that, yes, you can make amazing content that brings people together rather than divides them apart, right? And we've seen that not just from the Walt Disney Company, from other studios, and I think Iger is adopting that philosophy because, as you said, Jay, if you have 3 different groups, if you can have all 3 groups rather than just one, I think you'll go with that. So there you go.
Exactly. And by the way, Slimer's joke made me laugh out loud. OG told me in private conversation that he agrees with Trey on everything.
Slimer, he got you.
I'm exposed.
It's an expose. We just come up with a fake drama for our podcast and shows.
Exactly.
That's
so what opinion should I have today? And what angle should I?
Yeah, exactly. That's great. All right. right, so we have the final scene here I want to talk about. This is going to lead into both Jalen's comments and BJ's comments related to the future of this show and what's coming next. But in this final scene, it's suggested that someone with Beskar armor, Dre, you alluded to this as well, extracted Moff Gideon. The show, or the people in the show, Tiva and whoever he's talking to over the comm, suggests that means that Mandalorians were involved with Moff Gideon's extraction and saving him from trial. So let's talk about who we think that this might actually be. Dre, I'm going to go to you, obviously, because OG just dropped out. So what do you think? Who do you think that this is?
I don't really know who this is, to be quite honest with you. It could be any number of, I guess, individuals, or even individuals that we've not seen on screen yet before. Here's the interesting thing, though, about all this. How does Moff Gideon know so much about, Mandalorian culture, right? How did he even know Din Djarin's name? Right? It's kind of alluded to in season 1, but it's like he's constantly the guy who like knows about the Darksaber, knows about the teachings of Mandalore. He knows very well about the traditions that they have, what they find sacred, and so forth. We know that in Rebels there were a couple of clans of Mandalorians who actually were allies to the Empire. Specifically, right? I believe Sabine Wren, her family was part of the clan that was working for the Empire. In fact, she did work for the Empire in developing a weapon that could be used against Mandalorians themselves by using their armor against them. Very kind of interesting little subplot there. Obviously, Bo-Katan had other ideas about the Empire and their loyalties to their world and so forth. But was Moff Gideon a foundling himself? Was he somebody who had a clan or squadron of Mandalorians working directly under him at some point, and that's who he utilized to actually break himself out? That is kind of a very interesting. It also could be just a red herring, right? Just a piece of Mandalorian armor that was left behind specifically for the New Republic to actually find it. That could be as well. There's any number of different scenarios here, but if it is the case that Mandalorians actually did break them out and could be maybe have their allegiances towards the Empire, the Remnant, whatever you want to call them right now, that could lead to some maybe Mandalorian Civil War conflict, which would be very, very interesting, and something that we've only really kind of heard about in Mandalorian lore up until this point.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, Dre. I think they're setting it up for some major drama. Major drama with that Beskar there. I think that's the route they're going in. I think that it's gonna look, because what are we seeing? We're seeing a uniting right now of the Mandalorians, right? So now this new finding is the storytelling device to sort of put that wedge, to kind of split them apart, to create that drama and that civil war, like you mentioned, Dre. So yeah, I think that's the direction they're going in with. Absolutely.
And then we can see possibly by Bo-Katan writing the mythosaur and potentially taming the mythosaur to be hers, we could see that being like a way that she defeats that element. I do think that there's also some indications to me, like, so let's talk about this for a second. We don't know if Thrawn's coming. So some of the comments were mentioning, like, is this a lead into Thrawn? And the answer to that is maybe, but maybe not, right? Like, they can lead into Thrawn, and it would make sense as they're introducing us to Rebels characters to then introduce us to Thrawn. Thrawn might come later, though, in a different show that's still connected to the Mandalorian. Yes. Maybe it's Ahsoka or something else. And so then we see Moff Gideon taking the place for this particular season. I also think that there are some characters that in some way, shape, or form, we know they're going to show up again. We just don't know in what form. For example, I don't think that this is going to be Boba Fett working for the Empire, right? Like that doesn't make sense to me. Like, why would Boba Fett show up working for the Empire to help extract Moff Gideon? I don't see that happening, but I do see somebody who's been involved with the Mandalorians in the past, like somebody. So if it's not the Mandalorians or a faction of Mandalorians themselves, could it be that Cad Bane didn't die and he picked up some armor along the way and he's doing some missions for the Empire? There's somebody here that we have seen before that is likely going to show up again, whether they are Mandalorian or whether they've been associated with the Mandalorians, and it's going to have some level of impact on the conspiracy theory that puts the New Republic on one side, the Empire on another side, being led by Moff Gideon and or Thrawn, and then the Mandalorians on another side, so that we can have this triangle of conflict, with what you were talking about, OG, within this issue of saying there are Mandalorians that are good Mandalorians and there are Mandalorians that are maybe bad Mandalorians. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But I don't have a good guess for what it is right now, because that scene did something really well. And that scene basically set up something that we know is going to add drama and conflict, but it didn't really give us any clues as to where that drama and conflict was going to come from and how it was going to show up. So all of these theories are one of the reasons why we love storytelling, because these theories are like, it gets us excited for what comes next. It builds that tension and that suspense for us and wants us to keep watching. And so it really ends on a cliffhanger phenomenally well.
Here's the other thing too, outside of, I think, Bo-Katan, like you alluded to, OG, I think she is going to be this almost Moses or messianic figure that brings all the tribes together, right, to retake the land of the Israelites, or the Mandalorians, excuse me, of Mandalore, right? And it's that is an exciting prospect, and like you said, Jay, I think you're onto something there. Where if she can tame the Mythosaur, that will finally unite the clans, no matter what their allegiances might lie today. Very interesting. But yeah. Did you notice? I mean, why is the New Republic looking to cover up what happened to Moff Gideon? Isn't that interesting right there, right? Yeah. I mean, that's, obviously that would be very, very embarrassing, but is there an ulterior motive even there as well? Slimer says in the chat, is the armorer setting up Bo by strongly suggesting her to seek out other Mandalorian clans, knowing very well that they are allies of the remnants of the Empire? A possibility. A distinct possibility, for sure. I don't think the armorer is working with any malicious intent. I do believe she does want the Mandalorians to thrive once again, and I think she understands that Bo-Katan is that way in which they can actually do that. I think the armorer has built a trust with Bo-Katan, which is why she's coming forward with this proposition right now. So it's I don't suspect any maliciousness on her part, but hey, it is a possibility, right? I mean, we do know that Mandalorians can be power hungry, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I mean, like you were getting into, Dre, like the level of intrigue and the level of history that we can see throughout the Mandalorian series is pretty intense and pretty impactful. So if there's any other thoughts in the chat, by the way, I'm done with my questions. So if there's any other topics that you guys want us to address, please do so in the chat, because we can still have a little bit of extra time here.
That's a great comment, by the way.
Yeah, Slimer says, Dre, a weak government will lie to its people to cover up its weaknesses. Yes, it will. Absolutely. And that's actually I would highly recommend that you guys check out OG and Dre as they talk about even the Reedy Creek stuff, right? Like even the Reedy Creek stuff, it's interesting to see how we're all big fans of Disney. So this is going to come off as a criticism, but just take this not as me being like anti-Disney, but rather interesting that Disney would do such a thing. Mm-hmm. But isn't it interesting that Disney did try to like sneak in a message into that contract, right? Like it's and to Dre's point that we were talking about offline, is that indicative of them having a weak position and them trying to sneak it in there as if it shouldn't matter? These are all questions that we really do need to ask ourselves. And one of the things that we can do when we look at any story, whether it's playing out in real life or whether it's playing out on a screen that we're watching or book that we're reading, is one of the things that is important in every story is what are the motivations of the people involved and what are they trying to accomplish with those motivations? What benefit do they get back from taking certain actions? Are they being altruistic in their action? Or are they being a little bit underhanded in their action? What are they trying to accomplish? And you'll find, like we talked about earlier, and this is going to probably be true of the Mandalorians, some of those things are true in movements, right? Like you see one person in a movement say, I'm being altruistic. I just want the best result possible. And then you see another person being like, I mean, yeah, but I just want to get money this week, and the best way to do that is to align myself with you. So I'm going to align myself with you for the time being because I'll get money. And we need to do an assessment of those motivations. I think, like for example, if you take Bo-Katan has a very altruistic kind of notion of like bringing Mandalore back into its former glory. But let's not hide behind the fact that she also wants to be the person who leads. She has a desire to have the Darksaber. She wants to be the leader of this group. How would Bo-Katan feel if the armorer had said, not that she was the leader, but the armorer had said, by the way, Bo-Katan, keep your helmet on because I'm going to lead us and I'm going to lead Mandalore. Bo-Katan might have taken her helmet off right away in that kind of scenario, right? Like, so everybody has different motivations that they're playing with and that they're dealing with. So I think that we can watch for that in our stories and we can watch for that in real life to understand exactly what is happening and what's going on. That's why we say things like when we talk about and bring up even Iger and Chapek in this conversation, and we say things like, well, Iger has a motivation to moderate the company just like Chapek did. Well, why could that be the case? And as Dre alluded to earlier, because when you're trying to sell product, you want to find as many people to buy that product as possible. Correct. It is to your advantage to moderate your content so you can sell to somebody who thinks, A is true, and you can sell to somebody who thinks B is true, and they both buy your product and you make more money. So it's important to think through all of those motivations, because while art often takes a spiritual, political, human stance on the world, it also takes stances that are for the benefit of other things like making money as well. Let's face it, Disney wouldn't make The Mandalorian if they didn't think The Mandalorian was going to make them money. And so we got to think about all of these things as it pertains to Disney and all that as well.
Motivation is the master of reason. Reason is not the master of motivation. If you want to change your reasoning, change your motivation. So it's very applicable here as well. OG, any thoughts?
Absolutely.
I do. I do. Actually, it's about the Reedy Creek thing real quick.
Oh, no.
Get into it.
Say that, OG. All right, go ahead.
I do disagree, though, about it being a sneak attack because it was open to the public. The documents were filed with three entities, RCID.
Taking the Disney byline.
Hold on. The documents were filed with three entities, the RCID, Orange County, Osceola County, and available on all three record websites for more than 2 weeks before DeSantis signed the legislation. So was it sneaked in? I mean, did they have to call him personally to let him know? I don't
Check the dates on that, OG. Before that vote actually took place, it was a day before the vote. So I understand there's this idea that they didn't sneak that in. They did.
Well, here's how I would sit back and I would say this. If you feel like you want to be a person of integrity, do you need to sneak anything ever at all? Now, it might be a shrewd move. It might be a shrewd move to sneak in and do something. But the question is, why would you sneak? Why would you sneak though? And that's where, because I fall very squarely in the middle of the Reedy Creek issue. I don't feel like I don't like what DeSantis is doing to Disney, because I feel like it is a politically motivated. Let's look at DeSantis's motivation really quick here. What does he want? He wants to get more political power and associate himself with more political power. He also knows that he wants to please his base. And what does his base want? His base wants for there to be a moderation, if not a right leaning into what the political landscape would look like. And so as you look at that kind of motivation for what he's doing, I don't like what he is trying to do through Reedy Creek as an outlet. If you look at Disney's motivations, what are Disney's motivations? Well, Disney doesn't want to be pushed around by the government. They want to have as much freedom to do whatever that they want to do as possible. And at the end of the day, they want to make money, right? And so there's these complex motivations that are driving each side of these things. And I don't agree with either of their motivations, because I don't like the fact that there's someone using political power to stick it to a business organization. That doesn't actually feel like it aligns with a lot of what you would hear the GOP declare as like a thing that they're standing for. Right. They tend to be pretty free business. But I also don't like that Disney is not treating this as like it almost feels like they're treating it as a joke and they're getting a gotcha in. And I don't like that from Disney, because I prefer Disney to stick to making me more interested in Mandalorian than I am in RCID, right? Like don't bring those in an era where we're all going to talk about this on social media. Handle yourself in a way that takes the focus off of that and doesn't get us into the culture wars, and rather gets us into whatever art you're producing for this time. So I feel I fall strongly in the middle, and I don't know how to rectify those two opinions, right? Like I don't feel strongly on either way. I'm like, I don't like any of it. I don't, it's weird.
I see where you're coming from, Jay, but at the same time, it's kind of like a bully in school, right? You can make peace and just give the bully your lunch every day. And it'll be all good, you know, and every day to hand them your lunch and all good. It kind of, or you can stand up to him. And standing up to him is risky, but at the end, it's really probably the only way that the bullying is going to stop. So I think Disney needed to do something, because look, we've said on this channel many times, this was not the end. DeSantis made it clear, buckle up, that you're in for a ride. He was going to give Disney drama no matter what, if they cooperated or not. So I think Disney needed to punch back and show, hey, we're not going to take it. I don't know, just my opinion, but Dre, I know you agree with everything I just said, so go ahead.
Your interpretation of who the bully is in this situation is very interesting when you look at 30 long years that might suggest otherwise. It's very, very interesting. Listen, I'm going to withhold my thoughts here, because I want you guys to actually see that RCID video, because it is going to be worth watching for sure. But just understand here, folks, that you not only put wind into the political sails and the willpower necessary to actually enact changes, not into the sails of just DeSantis, because that's where it was limited to. After legislation was actually passed, it was limited to just DeSantis and what he wanted, right? But now the legislature has been made to look like fools as well. And again, that's a whole another round of motivation here coming. Again, they're going to want to get back there, and they're going to punch much harder than they did before. Remember what DeSantis did? It was about the lightest touch that he could possibly employ. We said at OG that, hey, this could have been a lot worse, but I'm glad that it was limited to what they actually did, just changing out some board of directors, let's say, right? But now all that is off the table once again. So I just want to caution people, if you want to fight, be careful what you wish for, especially when going up against Uncle Sam.
Well, and I'll just close by responding to two of those things, and then I want to pick up on where BJ Vincent leaves a comment, and then we'll close it out. But one of the things I wanted to respond to really quickly, OG, is I do feel like Disney was trying to stand up to a bully, but to me, standing up to a bully is not going on social media and not being upfront about, like, if you go bully the bully on social media and it just turns out that they look like an idiot, as opposed to confronting them in real life and being like, bro, you need to stop bullying me and I'm going to stand up for myself. Those are two different aspects to standing up to a bully. And the one aspect I think feels like it has a little bit more integrity. And so I'm just criticizing Disney on an integrity stance, not on they were shrewd. And I respect shrewdness to a degree, but I also feel like there was a little bit of lacking integrity there, which I think is odd. To Dre's point, I do think here's the problem. DeSantis learned something from Don't Say Gay and from Reedy Creek, and that is, it's good for me to pick on Disney because it gets people's eyes and ears. Yep. And if you're thinking about a presidential run, especially against somebody like Trump, who gets eyes and ears up the wazoo, I mean, that dude gets everybody paying attention, then he's got to think, like, what is it? So even for Disney to poke that bear is like, don't poke that bear. You're giving him all the ammo he needs to do what he wants to do. Yeah. And so I think now I do think that if they don't come down hard on Disney, they look weak. And one of the things we know about Trump's base is that they do not like to be perceived as weak. They do not like their candidates to be perceived as weak. And all of a sudden, if you can't get any of those people over to your side and you're DeSantis and you want to make a run, you are in major trouble, because if there's enough Republicans, Trump will wipe the floor in the primaries with you.
And that's the problem that DeSantis has right now, is that he has to respond strong.
He has
but
to.
now you're going through the court system, which is not known for its expeditious kind of processes, right?
Right.
So how long does this go on where he looks like a buffoon before he actually does something? And then at what point is the damage already set? So it's very interesting.
It's very
OG, you're assuming that the judiciary is the only tool in the tool chest, or the arrow in the quiver, as some have actually called it. There are many ways. But we will get into it.
Yeah, go watch that video. I'm not going to be on that video, so I just wanted to throw out those comments just because I'm not a legal expert. I'm into storytelling. These guys do a much better job of handling all that stuff. Go listen to them. They're going to do a phenomenal job. As you can see, they're coming at it from different angles, which means it's going to be even more interesting. But I want to focus on BJ's comment here as we'll transition back into the Mandalorian and then kind of set up the closing out of this show. And that is that BJ says, I hope Gideon's absence is a sign that he is still the big bad. It seems off for Thrawn to be the guy behind the rise of the First Order. It's been made clear that he has no feeling for political manipulations. And this is a really interesting comment because we talked about this before, like Star Wars hasn't done this as poorly as Marvel has, but Marvel in almost every single one of their series, maybe with the exception of Loki, because you do get to the version of Kang at the end of that series, they've always indicated that something big is going to happen, and then it's a little less big than you anticipated, which is hard because controlling fan expectations is part of storytelling, and you can't like overshoot their expectations because it's sort of like over-promising and under-delivering. And so it's going to be interesting that so many fans have grasped onto the idea of Thrawn. I think we all think that Thrawn is coming, but we don't all think that it's necessarily happening in this series.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting to see how Disney handles that, because Moff Gideon is coming off being a loser whose whole strategy failed. And if he's got more ships and stuff somewhere else that he can like rally people around, that's cool. But it doesn't seem as simple as having Thrawn been out there with this giant armada. So it's going to be weird. It's going to be weird to see how they conclude this particular series and then kick off the next one, because we know that Ahsoka is going to be related, and we know that there's going to be another Book of Boba Fett season with us as well. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you guys think, how is Disney handling this Gideon Thrawn thing, and what do you hope to see? And then we'll close it out there.
Well, I think it's interesting. BJ makes some great points here. I have a feeling, look, they're definitely setting Thrawn up. The space whales were a total tell.
That's right.
With that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to show up in Mando, right? We have Ahsoka coming out. There's a good chance that they might be saving Thrawn for Ahsoka. So
I think they are. I think so? I think Moff Gideon is like a very much a Mandalorian thing,
right.
Whereas Ahsoka herself, like obviously having dealt with Thrawn in, Rebels, and having her utter the words Thrawn, I believe in one of the episodes in season 2, like that kind of more associates Thrawn with her. Right. But that doesn't mean that he can't make an appearance here, and I think he already has. I still believe that. Look, listen, we know that Thrawn is all about culture as well. Those TIE interceptors that destroyed Bo-Katan's castle, right? How did they know to attack that specific thing? TIE interceptors, we hadn't seen that previously associated with Moff Gideon. I think there's some influence there. I think, is Gideon the big bad, or is this all kind of leaning towards something else? I think it's leaning towards that, but I think Moff Gideon is, like, for this season, for this show, I think he is still the big bad as isolated here. But these shows we know will connect. Yeah.
And Slimer says he agrees with Dre. I think that that's actually a great way to do it. What I think would be really cool is if Thrawn goes to extract, because let's ask the question, like, if Moff Gideon was already defeated, what value is he, right? Well, I do think that Gideon holds a very specific kind of value that Thrawn could actually very much appreciate, and that is an understanding of the science, which is why they're getting rid of Pershing, behind being able to extract probably midichlorians, but something else from a Force user like Grogu, and being able to then say, so Thrawn can say, I can use Moff Gideon because Moff Gideon has knowledge of something that can go bigger. So why would Moff Gideon then be valuable to Thrawn? Because he could be a general in his army specifically around sort of a black op towards getting that those midichlorians from Grogu to be used in other soldiers, which is a pretty good lead-in, by the way, to something called the Acolyte, because now we can actually see them extracting those midichlorians, putting them in a Sith Acolyte, not governed by the rule of the Sith, but rather governed by the dark side as appointed by Thrawn, which would be really fascinating and a really good way to take the series, if you ask me. Yeah. So I do like that aspect of it, but any last thoughts, gentlemen, before we close it out? OG, like, where can people find you? What are your last thoughts about this episode? Anything you want to throw out before we close it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to say that I've so far have really enjoyed season 3 of Mando. I thought it's been really, really good. I'm kind of bummed out that more people aren't checking it out, because I do think it's worth it. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's wild, but you can find me here on YouTube, Orange Grove 55. We do a lot of content here. We got Jay doing the Story Geek thing, talking Mando and the stories that matter in our lives. We got VashSky down below with his Freshly Squeezed show here on the channel. We got Mr. Citrus Corner doing his Walt Disney World show, Disney Family Man 23. We got some great content here, focusing on all kinds of entertainment, theme parks, movies, film, even the corporate side of things. So check us out if you haven't already. Subscribe. And Jay, I just want to thank you, as always, for being such a gracious host. You are awesome, my friend.
Thank you. You guys are awesome to be on here. And just something I gotta say this because I believe that some of the people that we all know and love, and truly, we might not agree with them, but we appreciate their perspectives. I believe some of them can fall into what other people would call being a shill or being a grifter. And I will say, just to compliment my two brothers here, they do not do that. So when they get into this Reedy Creek stuff, they're not going to give you one side of the issue or another side of the issue. They're going to go through all the sides of the issue so that you are the best informed to think about it in your own way and not have to grift or shill with somebody else. So I just want to point that out. I think you guys are phenomenal at that, and you're going to do a great job. So go listen to their show on Reedy Creek, because that stuff is phenomenal. Mr. VashSky, where can people find you, and what are you up to next?
I want to respond to that little comment that you made there about the Acolyte and so forth. It's a very interesting thing, because the Mandalorians, I think Dave Filoni has kind of reiterated this before in interviews and stuff like that, they're supposed to be a counter to the Jedi. So their whole kind of being, their whole way of life, it's supposed to be kind of not only a counterbalance to the Jedi, but actually a way of taking down Jedi. Their armor, for example, resists lightsabers. They have those kind of what do you want to call them? Like grappler hooks that kind of like tie up Jedi, and stuff like that. So to have the Mandalorians actually face, a Force wielding kind of presence would be very, very interesting and very, very in line with the lore of the Mandalorian. So that should be a pretty cool thing. But what we're doing next, well, OG, I think we've got two big things coming up. We got the RCD video for sure, which we are absolutely going to do, but also too the shareholders meeting for the Walt Disney Company takes place April 3rd. So we're definitely going to have a recap on that one, as you could expect, right? And remember, that shareholders meeting is where there's a question and answer portion from people who hold Disney stock. So that is always got some fireworks attached to it. In fact, the Mary Poppins, attraction, right? Bob Chapek's comments regarding that and the Marvel e-ticket actually came from a previous shareholders meeting. So again, expect some fireworks there for sure. But if you guys want to follow me, you can go ahead and do so right down there at VashSky. Just go ahead and type it in, and it should pop up for, as Christine Wastelands McCarthy would say, for all the
robust
discussion right there. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at OrangeGo55. So please hit that subscribe button, guys. Hit the like button if you can. It really does help us with the algorithm. If you could share this out to any of your platforms, if you actually like what you actually saw here, hit the bell icon for notifications if you are subscribed, and well, comment either in the chat or down below on what your thoughts on this episode of Mandalorian, what you thought of this episode, and maybe your comments on a whole other range of topics that we also covered in today's video.
Nice. Well, special thanks to Jalen Morris, BJ Vincent, Matthew Muir, Theme Park Casual, who's always awesome about posting links in the chat as well.
Yes.
Slimer, thanks for showing up. You guys are all amazing. I'm trying to see if I missed anybody else in here, but I think, Lorena showed up. Thank you to Lorena for showing up for a little bit here while she's on her day off over at Magic Kingdom. I don't know if she takes a day off, man. She does a lot of content and has a day job. It's just a lot of stuff. But definitely check that out. And just so let you know as well, I will be on Lorena's show in the coming week. So if you follow me on Twitter, I will be posting about that. Had a great conversation about storytelling, about Disney, and how the two things kind of come together. And you can always follow me right here at Jay Sherer on Twitter. I will be here on OG55's channel doing the Story Geeks show. Right now we have a weekly show, but every once in a while we take a break from Mandalorian content and we get into some other film or television show as well. So we will be doing those kinds of things. Stay tuned for that kind of content. I'm sure we'll be talking about Indy 5 on this show. I am positive we'll talk about Indy 5 on this show. And we're going to come back. We'll be talking about that. Make sure you follow OG55. Make sure you follow VashSky, and make sure you follow me as well. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for having a great show with us. And I hope you have a fantastic end to the rest of your weekend. Bye.